and welcome to Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to host tonight's event with Sidik Fofana presenting his new book. Presenting his new book, Stories from the Tenants Downstairs. He will be talking with Chantal V. Johnson, so you're in for an excellent evening. Before I turn things over to them, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. If you would be so kind, please silence your cell phones or turn them off. Masks are to be worn by everyone this evening, although the authors are given the option to have them off, just so y'all are aware. Signed books are available at the register, and then Sidik kindly offered to do personalizations. So once you've purchased your signed copy, you can come on and meet him and get a personalization. And recording is going on for this evening. Hello. And will be available on YouTube after this evening. Our interviewer tonight is Chantal V. Johnson. Chantal is a tenant lawyer and writer, a graduate of Stanford Law School, and a 2018 Center for Fiction Emerging Writers Fellow. She lives in New York. She will be speaking with our featured author, Sidik Fofana. Sidik earned an MFA from New York University. He lives with his wife and son, who are here this evening, in New York City, where he is a public school teacher. His new book, Stories from the Tenants Downstairs, is an electrifying collection of 8 interconnected stories showcasing the strengths, struggles, and hopes of the tenants of one of Harlem's low-income high-rises in a powerful storytelling experience. Author Mateo Ascaritor praises it as a collection that will make your jaw drop several times. What a gift Fofana's writing is, especially now. So you're in for something special tonight. Sidik will be reading from the book, and then Chantal will join him in conversation, and then you all will have the chance to ask questions after that. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Sidik Fofana and Chantal V. Johnson.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? All right. Thank you all for coming. Your presence really means me. I see a lot of people who supported me in this very early, and I'm very touched by that. To people who are new to my work, thank you for supporting me so early in the game here. I'm still convinced that you all were trying to get to the Barclays Center, but then just got lost. I'm going to read from a story called Tumble. It's about a gymnast, aspiring gymnast, who comes back home and is reflecting on her own situation and a friendship that she had with another girl. So, without further ado, here it is. I try to say, hey, Niche, you're a tough girl. I was tough since the day I knew I wanted to be a gymnast. When I saw Carrie Strug on TV, I thought it was so awesome how she lifted her hands to the sky like, hey, everyone, come hug me. I was 8 years old. That same afternoon, I backflipped off this broken slide and landed on my feet. I wish I could say that's all she wrote, but you don't just hop around in the playground in Harlem and ta-da. Nobody's gonna go look at little Niche and say, let's nurture her. When I saw that flyer at the Central Park Zoo that said, come one, come all, tumble away, I literally had to snag it down before my teacher reported me missing. I remember the night I showed it to my mother, who wasn't past slapping any of us. Oh no, not gonna happen, sweetie. You don't know what it's about. I don't know what it's about, she said, but I know how much it costs. That would have been the end of that, had she not seen the line my brother scribbled at the bottom, which was, she get to do backflips with rich girls. My brother, who you only heard when his Sega Genesis was overheating. My mother finally relented, and I wound up at a gym in Midtown with all these girls in polka dot and neon leotards, and me in jean shorts, straddling the uneven bar for dear life until I hear my shorts tear. I had to be tough. Everybody thinks you'll automatically become that black girl who is the best. But you really have to watch out, because otherwise you might be that urban girl who tries to hang, gets over her head, and quits. I only invited Kaya to a meet once, when we were both around 10. We were only 3 months apart in age. She was in the courtyard one day in kindergarten, and our mothers basically shoved us forward to shake hands. It was awkward because just seconds ago, her mother was cussing her out. Normally, my parents would call that a red flag, but we were the only 2 children out that day, and it would have been kind of rude not to say hi. From there, I'd run into her by the elevator or coming from the 2 train. Every summer, next to the jungle gym and the sand the homeless people peed in, we parlayed while my mother watched me from the lobby window. I'd do a somersault for Kaya and she'd say, "Whoo, wow, and you're not even afraid of falling." I spent most of my time training, and at a prep school, one of the dads at Midtown Gymnastics helped me get into. In other words, not around black people. I was fascinated with Kaya, how even in the 5th grade, her voice sounded like it was filled with concrete. How Ashanti would come on someone's window, and she would start dancing lazily and effortless, like she was possessed by a rhythm she didn't even want. I trained 6 days a week, 6 hours a day for 8 years straight. I was constantly taping myself up and falling these ghastly falls. Some days I felt like I couldn't move. I felt like an absolute beginner. I was hardly focused on school. I killed my body. I spent a good part of my life in tears. But I fought through it. I ate my soy and listened to my Ramones. That's what I did all of high school, and it paid off. I was in the student lounge at school the day a local magazine announced I was invited to nationals. At Banneker Terrace, they hung a banner from the front wall of the bingo room. Somebody from the public access channel came by and interviewed me. Tenants kept asking me for photos and to backflip. Kaya, on the other hand, was up to smoking Newports and wearing expensive blouses that still had the tags on them. Her crowd was seedy, but she always maintained that they were only her friends and she wasn't like them. That week that the building put up the banner up for me, she hung with a bunch of other teens in black bandanas back by the dumpsters on beat-up lawns, drinking and slap boxing. I was sure they heard about me. They saw the banner, heard all the hullabaloo, but they were fine in their underworld. One evening, I saw them out there sitting on each other's laps, and I decided to take out the garbage. I had my headphones in and kept my head up like I couldn't be bothered. But as I passed by them, I accidentally smeared my garbage bag on somebody's Nikes. "I'm sorry about that," I said. It was really quiet, but then as I continued, I heard someone repeat, "I'm sorry about that," followed by Kaya bursting out in giggles. It was the giggles that totally struck me down. So I said, fine. The very next day, I wore a hoodie that the National Press Office sent me. It was 85 degrees, but I wore it anyway. Anytime I was in the lobby and any of them was in earshot, I made it a point to use big words. If I was posing for a picture with somebody and one of them was behind me, I'd take my sweet time and indulge. I swear I didn't ask for Kaya's boyfriend to kiss me. That was sprung on me. I was in the elevator, headed to a workout, when him and his boy came on. He taps me on the arm when I'm minding my business and goes, "You that acrobat girl?" And I go, "You mean gymnastics?" And he goes, "Bet you be doing that stuff naked." And right in the middle of me telling him I wasn't the one, he kisses me, which of course gets back to Kaya's ears as the other way around. 2 weeks before Nationals, I go to take Rerun for a walk out of the back entrance at night. I bend down to fix her collar, and when I get up, I'm surrounded by a whole bunch of black bandanas. Kaya is in the background. Her friend Princess gets in my face and goes, "So you want to mess with people's mans?" and then knees me in the gut. At first they're kicking and punching, but they grab hold of my hoodie and start pulling it off. Once they did that, one of the girls takes it to this parked car and wraps it in the axle like it's some rag. And when it was nice and dirty, one of the boys threw it on the floor, takes out his penis, and urinates on it. I'm 100% sure they would have picked it back up and thrown it on me had a woman not walked by and yelled, "What's going on over here?" The very next evening, I'm back at their little dumpster den, and flanked beside me are 2 cops. "There they are," I go, looking everybody in the eye. I look Kaya in the eye the longest, but it's not until the handcuffs come out that she realizes what's going on. "I'm a teenager," she blurts out. "Please." The last scream is so shrill it vibrates my ribs. I was this close to telling the cops never mind, but I didn't. Her eyes were violent and dead. It should have satisfied me, but it did nothing. Their beatdown left me with a muscle contusion and fractured wrist. I tried to continue training for Nationals, but I couldn't get through any of my routines. The day I withdrew my name, I sobbed all night. My teammates tried to console me. "You'll get another chance," they said. But I was 17. As I powdered up for my Michigan meets that fall semester, I told myself, "Niche, look where you've made it all the way to, a free education." Those crowds would be blazing with spirit, but I could only concentrate on the empty seats and half-assed it. Right before our Northwest showcase, I quit. I walked around campus for a few days as an ex-gymnast, then I quit school altogether. I'll just stop right there.
That was fantastic. Congratulations, Sidik, on your astounding, marvelous debut. So in preparing for this conversation, I didn't know how to organize my questions, but then I turned to the back of the book and I started looking at your blurbs.
Oh,
And I realized that there's something in each of the blurbs that kind of related to a theme or a question that I wanted to ask you anyway. So part of the way that I'm going to move through the conversation is kind of going through some of these blurbs and asking you questions that came to mind as I read them. So the first blurb is from Lori Moore. And she wrote, This is the book I've been waiting for ever since reading the first few of Mr. Fofana's stories 8 years ago. I had never read anything quite like them. She also goes on to say they have a brilliant architecture that can go unnoticed beneath the carefully textured voices, which I completely agree with. But I want to go back to what she said about 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So she's saying that she read some of your stories 8 years ago. So I'd love to hear you talk about what were those first stories that you were writing. Are they in this collection? Were they cut? And if you could just talk generally about the origin of the collection and your journey to organizing the collection that we have today.
Yeah, sure. So I started the collection in 2006, maybe like a year or so out of undergrad, and it started with just the title, with a slight change. The original title was Stories from Our Tenants Downstairs, but I changed it to Stories from the Tenants Downstairs because I didn't want it to seem like that was from the perspective of the landlord. So I changed it to Story from the Tenants Downstairs, and you know, I was very new to writing. In undergrad, I never took a creative writing workshop. The only creative thing I did was like I was like a rapper, so I wrote raps all day. But as far as like writing a story, I didn't do that until maybe the very end of undergrad or like right after graduation. And so a lot of it was just learning how to write, scribbling drafts, and just doing it for my own personal entertainment. So a lot of those first endeavors didn't make it to this final book. But years later, I started an MFA at NYU. I applied the first time, and I got rejected. I got rejected everywhere. And then spent a couple years, applied again. The very first year at NYU, they really explained the scheduling really clear to us. It was so cool. They were like, you can, whatever your first choice is, usually you get your first or your second choice in terms of who you want to study with for workshop. And so I remember that first year, my first choice was Zadie Smith. And I was like, wow, if I get to study with Zadie Smith, like, and then I had a second choice, third choice. And for some reason that year, I didn't get any of my top 3 choices. And I'm not that like guy who's like, let me speak to the manager, right? I'm not that guy. But I did for that. I was like, sent a little email, like polite email, like, I know you said we were gonna get our first and second choice. And they were really nice back. And they were like, yeah, it didn't work out this time, but I promise if you wait a semester, we have Lori Moore coming, and you could, you'll get first choice with Lori Moore. And I was like, oh yeah, sign me up for that. And so it turned out the workshop that I did have the first year turned out to be amazing, and then I was with Lori Moore, and she was just very nurturing from the beginning. And the very first story that I workshopped with her was a story called The Okie Doke, which is, a bunch of friends get together and they try to pull off a Chinese food delivery robbery. People are workshopping it, and people have given me such great criticism over the years, things that have helped me out. And I remember that class, they were like, saying things like, oh, voice is too harsh. You might want to, like, some of these references might be a little bit too stereotypical. You might want to, like, fix them up a little bit. And what they were saying was totally right. But for some reason, like, Lori Moore during that workshop, like, leaned in and whispered to me. She was like, don't listen to that. And like, even though it was like they were giving me great advice, just to have her like say like, trust your instincts and whatnot, and that she was on my side, like I felt like that moment was like the start of it. And right after that workshop, at the end, because usually you just bring hard copies for everybody in the class, and then they have the hard copies, and they tear it up and they give it back to you, and then that's it. But after that, the last class, I had workshopped 2 stories with her, and she said, "Can I have copies of those?" And I found that it was kind of weird. Like, I should have known. Like, now it makes perfect sense now. Like, oh, she might have wanted to give it to someone. But I was just like, okay. And then I gave it to her on the phone, like really late too, like 2 weeks late. And she ended up giving it to like a bunch of editors who, you know, they didn't take it, but they sent me like really good feedback, really nice notes. And then the one editor who took the okie doke was Adam Ross at Swan Review. And he's just kind of this like maverick, trailblazing guy who's just not afraid of anything. He just like took that story and published it. But Lori Moore was the person who just told me, trust my instincts, and she read a lot of the first stories of that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's every writer's dream. What happened to you? And she linked the MFA experience to the business side by helping you get published.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you know, that's wild. I want to ask a question about her influence on your collection, but I may ask that later, just because of the second person that you use a lot. She also, and like the first story is the Rent Manual, and she has all of those stories that are like second person, kind of like instruction. But I want to move to Ben Fountain's quote next. Ben Fountain says, "What he does with these stories and with our beautiful bottomless American language is nothing short of revelatory." And so I want to talk to you a bit about language, specifically the relationship between speech and writing, your choice to use vernacular and dialect throughout the collection. Do you have, well, why did you do that?
No, I think very early in it, I was new to creative writing, and I think a lot of it started with, a lot of fiction writing started with just me reading contemporary fiction. And I feel like we all in school are assigned books from traditional authors, traditional classics. For me, I had no idea in school that there was a whole world, people who were writing stories who were actually alive. Like I thought everybody, like we only read people who passed on. And so when I discovered that, it was like, whoa. And the stories and the authors that I kept coming back to were people who were doing like really fantastic things with voice. The first time I read Push by Sapphire, I was like, whoa, I can hear the girl's voice as I'm reading it. George Saunders, Ring Lardner from back in the day, Alice Walker. I remember as a young teacher, there was a textbook on the ground, and it was like not a textbook that I was using, and I was flipping through it and I found a story called Raymond's Run by Toni Cade Bambara, and it's a young girl she's from Harlem too, and she's just telling the story in her voice, and I was like, wow. So that I've always been attracted to that. I've always been, anytime someone's talking, either in the subway or just out on the street, and they're unaware that their conversation could be like transcribed, I'm always like mentally transcribing it in my head, and just like things that like it's funny, I can't at this point I can't turn it off. Like for instance, and then when I see it in other people's writing, like I know Disha gave us both, Disha Phil, y'all gave us both blurbs. And in her, one of her stories, she wrote, you know, this guy was flying, and she spelled it F-O-I-N-E, and I'm like, you know, that's the way it's said. I was watching The Tiger King on Netflix, and this guy said, he was like in a just southern drawl. He's like, you can guarantee that I'll do this, like, so guarantee, and then like, you know, in the middle. So just fascinated with words.
And you have a lot of that. I mean, seat.
Yeah, scene.
I was like, yeah.
Scene.
And I really liked what they have you up here doing. I was like, I've literally heard that before, and I've never seen that in a book before. I mean, something that I also like is in the story Light Feet, which is one of my favorites. Naji is a 7th grader who we already know struggles with reading and writing, and that story is written pretty phonetically, and it's written in the form of a letter, and in some ways it may be like the story that has the worst writing and the worst grammar, but it's also simultaneously the story that has the clearest kind of moral clarity or moral education and poignancy in the collection. Does that resonate with you as something that you were going for, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that story was a suggestion from another writer, and it's funny how like when I workshop things, other writers would just give me suggestions for other stories. Even last night I was doing a virtual event with Marcus Burke in that section where there's Kaya. He's like, I want to hear Kaya's story next time. So I'm like, I don't know, I've been just taking these suggestions. I remember during one workshop, one of my writer friends was like, you should write a story about kids dancing on the train. And as a New York City public school teacher, you know, I've definitely had one or two of those types who, you know, after school in the evenings and the weekend, they would be on the trains dancing. And so I definitely wanted to explore that topic, and also the idea of a confessional letter. I was reading the slush pile, which I love to read the slush pile at a public space. One of my very first volunteer jobs, and I remember reading this one story where it was written from the point of view of a gay man who was confessing his crush to a straight friend. And just the confession and the epistolary form of that was just like a raw thing of remorse for me, and I was like, I want to do that. As far as like the misspelling and stuff like that, you know, subconsciously, real talk, subconsciously I got that idea from Flowers for Algernon, that story where it's like, the guy's not very smart, and he's gone through this experiment, and he has to write a diary, and he's misspelling stuff at first, and also as a New York school teacher, anytime there's something that happens, like a disciplinary issue, like there's a fight, or you know something happens, a lot of times the kids have to like write out a statement of what happens. And those are very, very interesting forms of literature, to say that. So, yeah.
That's a good transition to talk about the relationship between your day job of being a teacher. You've been a teacher for over a decade, right? And this collection. There's 3 stories. One that I think is kind of the centerpiece of the collection, about Miss Dallas, who's a paraprofessional in a classroom. And it's about 40 or 50 pages. And that collection then leads to 2 stories that are related to 2 kids in the class where she's a para. I'm wondering if you could talk about how your teaching influenced your writing, Are these kids, you know, composites of kids that you've taught? I will say that I think you've captured the choreography of the classroom in a way that I've never seen before. All of the hijinks and the jokes and the chaos, and it definitely seems informed by your teaching.
Yeah. 15 years of pain and trauma. I love teaching. It's, you know, it's been very rewarding over the years, and that's not to say like, you know, every day I go in there with like a sense of joy. You know, there's like lots of challenges to it. But over the years, you just in the classroom you see. You start to, after a couple of years, you start to see like the same types of students, and you know, just when you're like, oh, this person graduated, we'll never see like that type of student. A couple of years down the line, you'll see another personality that just reminds you of the. So I think through that, like I got good at like giving nice short descriptions of students. You know, there's that student who like holds one nostril down and blows the snot with the other. There's someone who asks you the questions all the time. And like I think schools, especially in New York City, are places where you just find an abundance of stories. From the teachers will have stories, principals, the paraprofessionals, students will have stories about their lives, and it's just constant mix, constant personality. There's also the kid that like, another type is like the kid that like laughs disruptively. There's always the kid that laughs disruptively, and you're like a typical exchange between me and that kid would be like, I'd be like, okay, John, stop laughing. Stop laughing. What? It was a joke, it was funny. Why, what? You're laughing disruptively. What are you saying? I can't laugh, I can't. John, step outside. Step outside. Now outside, why are you asking me to step outside? Because you were laughing. Like, no. John, I'm gonna call your mother. John, speak to your mother. Ma, it's me. It's me, John. Yeah, Mr. Fofana's class. Yes. I know, right? Right? He's saying, now he's saying I can't laugh. I told you, that's what I told you last night, that's why I be skipping this class sometimes. I can't with that way. All right, I know. All right, okay. Ma, yeah. What are you making tonight? You may want to decide. All right, bye, Mom. Is that all, Mr. Fofana? You didn't ask me to step out? No, it's just like a daily basis.
Fantastic. I feel like that deserves like so is that your writing process?
Yeah. And then I come here, and then Chantal goes, how was teaching today?
So Deisha's blurb focuses on the gentrification aspect of the collection. So the stories are linked in that all of these tenants live in the same building in Harlem, where there's a new owner that's taking over, forcing some people out, forcing some people to downsize, jacking up people's rents. What Deisha's blurb gets at, she said he's given us a beautiful blueprint for the gentrification story. Let it be bold. Let it honor the complexities of those who are struggling to hold on. And this is something that I really felt that you got, is that gentrification is incredibly complicated, and individuals within a building that's experiencing gentrification may have just very different orientations towards what's happening to the building. And like, not everyone's an organizer, not everyone wants to be an activist. There's only one person in the collection, Quanisha, who's even working with the older tenant organizers to do something about what's going on in the building. Everyone else is just kind of living their lives, and their status as a tenant is almost, I mean, you know, Miss Dallas's story takes place almost entirely where she works. It doesn't take place in the apartment. So like, some of them are more rooted in the building, some of them are not. But I guess I just wanted to hear you talk about your approach to thinking about gentrification and what was going on in the building through the different characters.
Well, that's a great question. I started with, I knew I wanted to write something that took place, was more contemporary, and if it addressed a social issue, I wanted to, you know, have it address, you know, a contemporary social issue. And growing up in Boston, I grew up in a neighborhood called Roxbury, which is a predominantly black neighborhood in Roxbury. I moved there in 1989, and it was a very run-down neighborhood. The house that I moved in, it wasn't even a house. It was like, it was a totally abandoned, boarded up, and as a matter of fact, the only way my parents could afford it was, at that time, the city had a program where if you like put a little down payment on any of those abandoned houses on that street, they were all abandoned, then the city would pay to renovate it. So that's what my parents did. And over the years, it was like that neighborhood where you would just like, people would be like, oh, you know, that's a neighborhood. I think the euphemism was always like, it's a neighborhood you want to just drive by. You don't want to like stop there for a while. But then after a while, like especially when I was like late teens, that's when, you know, they built a highway near my neighborhood, and you started to see a lot of renovation projects. And we, you know, growing up, there was one white lady in our neighborhood, and she was like a community organizer, and we thought she was crazy. She would walk in the neighborhood at night by herself, and like, we thought she was crazy. And then by the time I was like 20, 25, demographics start to shift a little bit. So I always thought about that. And we met through the Center for Fiction program, and I remember before, as fellows, we all met, looking at everybody's bio and seeing that you were a tenants lawyer. And I was like, wow, I'm writing about tenants and whatnot. So I'm about to throw that, just beware, I'm about to throw that question back at you. And your experiences as a lawyer with this. But yeah, from my neighborhood, and then like living in and hanging out in Harlem, living in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, it's not like gentrification, to me, at least what I've observed, is not like, it's not like police brutality. Like police brutality is like one where there's a clear cut, something happens, something terrible happens, and it's polarizing. Whereas gentrification, sometimes you can't even tell it's happening. And so I think it was important for me to kind of portray that a little bit in the collection, where it's not like one culminating event, and it's not people who all believe, who are all like against gentrification and not. And so there are characters who are like, all right, it's about damn time that we got some great restaurants in here. And then got characters who are just like really, really militant. But it was important for me to kind of try to portray both sides. But when you're like representing representing tenants, and often maybe they're having like rent issues and whatnot. Have you seen like tenants like blame society or like, gentrification, or are there tenants who are like, no, this is my fault,
There's just a mix. I mean, I think some people think systemically and structurally, and some people don't. And like I said, some people are joiners and wanna, I think organizing was a real struggle because people like don't have time for that, or they're not interested in that, or they're suspicious of working with organizers who are coming into their neighborhood. And so I think there was a range of attitudes in the same way that you've captured in the book. Like, who's the old guy who just wants to play chess outside? He doesn't want the old ladies to like use him as like a protest flashpoint. He just wants people to play chess with. And so if the restaurant can help him with that, that's what he wants. And so I think you just did a really good job of capturing that, because this book is not. It's not a white paper. It's not a policy paper. It's not a manifesto. It's a collection of stories. Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So start thinking of some questions, please. And there's so many questions that I want to ask, but I think I'd like to focus on the final blurbs each talk about your characters. So Mateo says that you capture the brilliance of ordinary Americans, elevating the everyday through your vivid depictions of Banneker Terrace's captivating residents. And Mitchell S. Jackson says that your collection is it's full of characters with immense fullness. And so I wanted to talk to you about creating the characters, but specifically there was an aspect of their fullness that I was really interested in, which is their moral sensibilities or their values. Many of the characters just have a strong sense of values, or you're depicting them, like with Naji, you're depicting a kid who's experiencing regret for the first time. I thought that was really interesting. You have characters like Mimi and Mr. Murray, who are very prideful characters. You have Miss Dallas, who has a very clear sense of morality in terms of her relationship to Mr. Broderick, the white Harvard kind of Teach for America guy, who she finds him to be fundamentally like morally wrong and bad. And she makes it her mission to kind of sabotage his efforts in the classroom. And so I just wanted to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I feel like those observations are very insightful. A lot of the characters in the stories have to make tough decisions, and sometimes they're led to make a bad choice that ends up sometimes in a crime. And I think as I was writing it, what was more interesting for me was the moral dilemma of it. And I remember maybe in high school English class, when we were reading like Greek literature, teachers would always talk about this thing called the tragic flaw. Like anytime there's a Greek hero, for some reason there's this one really like errant part of his personality. I remember in Oedipus, it's pride. It's like he doesn't want to believe, he doesn't want to listen to what people are saying about this very, very strange truth that's happening in his life. I think about and Things Fall Apart with Okonkwo, again, it's like a sense of pride, an sense of pride that leads to the fall. And so when I think of a story like the Rent Manual about this woman named Mimi who's trying to make rent, but at the same time, has this pride and independence where she doesn't want to come across as somebody who needs help or somebody who can't make it that month. That to me, I feel like, I always think about like the Greek tragic flaw, and that was the most interesting thing for me. It's not like, is she gonna steal or not? Or in the okey doke with the delivery of, like, are they gonna rob? Mm-hmm. It's more like, are they gonna compromise their morals? And I think that's what for me, that's always more interesting than the actual like transgression, is the idea of like, you have to preserve your identity, and then you're faced with something that challenges what you think about yourself. Mm-hmm. So.
Like this. Great. All right, let's turn over to some audience questions. Do you have any? Yes.
All right. So early on in your statement, you mentioned that you're not really much of an artist, other than doing some rapping back in the day. I do recall in your bio that I read many years ago that you did 2 plays on Broadway. One specifically, George C. Wilson Colored Museum. Can you talk about how that play and your interactions in that play helped you form into the writer that you are today?
Yeah, so I'm talking about that. That's Noah. He's a best friend from college. He's been trolling me at every event. So yeah, he's asking about a play that I did in college, which we both did together, called the Colored Museum. It was the only time, well, one of 2 times I've ever acted.
It was very good. It was the better time.
It was very good. The first time I ever acted was Shakespeare, Much Ado About Nothing, which I was terrible in. The only good thing about that play, the only good memory was there was another girl in that play, and her name was Lindsay, and I like had a crush on her, and I tried to talk to her, and we ended up talking after that play. And fast forward, we got married.
That did make all the noise at this time.
Yeah, that's my son making all the noise. My son's like, wow, listening to this idiot. But, yeah, so thanks, Noah, for bringing up those memories. See you in the next event.
You want to say hi to you today, so.
Yeah, solid. How you doing? Give me 5. Yeah. This is Asada.
Well, I have another question about the endings of your stories. I think that each story ends in a way that is just completely subtly brilliant and incredible. And they're kind of soft endings, many of them. Like there's one end I wrote down. There's an unfinished sentence that is a gut punch of an unfinished sentence. There's a surprise kindness in the elevator. There's a gentle request to an unidentified you. And there's a moral justification for a potentially bad act or failure to act. But they're all, when I describe them that way, they're just these little kind of quiet moments. And I'm just so curious how you approach endings. And where did you learn to do this?
I mean, I guess the short answer is suggestion and theft. So I'll give you an example of a suggestion and a theft. Before that, I think a story that I read where I was just like, this ending is incredible, was a classic story called The Lady or the Tiger. And it takes place in olden times, and there's this king. Anytime somebody commits a crime, instead of like punishing them, he'll bring them to like a big Coliseum area, and there'll be two doors, and there's like one is a beautiful lady, and then the second door is a tiger. And whoever the transgressor is will have to pick the door. And if they pick the lady, then they're spared and they get married or something. They pick the tiger and then they'll get mauled. And so the story goes on, and it's like, there was this one prince who started messing with the king's daughter. And the king got mad because this prince was messing around with his daughter. So he brought him to the Coliseum. And he was like, you're gonna have to pick between the lady, the tiger. And you're like, oh my God, is this prince gonna be alive or not? What's gonna happen? And then in the story, it's like, the princess who was messing with this guy is out there in the stands, and she knows which one is the lady, and she knows which one is the tiger. She knows which door. But it so happens to be that the lady is one of this guy's main crushes. Guy that really likes this girl. And the princess knows which one. And then the story ends. Which one did she pick? The lady or the tiger? So like when I think of endings, I'm like, whoa, like. But an example of one that was a suggestion, the first story, I will spoil the ending, right? Mimi's in a grocery store, and she has to steal something, or she's contemplating whether she's going to steal it or not. And in the original version, it's like she steals the diapers, she makes rent, and lives happily ever after. But a suggestion came from Adam Ross from Swan Review, and he was like, well, the major dramatic question of the story is she gonna steal or not? And so I was like, wow. And so the ending ended up being like, instead of her happily ever after, she turns to her son and she's like, we're spacemen, and spacemen need supplies, and she steals. So that one was like a suggestion. An example of a theft is something I stole from Kendrick Lamar. A song called Sing, I think it's called Sing For Me Dying of Thirst. And in this song, it's like from 3 perspectives of people, and they're all telling their story, but they all die at the end. And as he's rapping as these different people, I think one had like a terminal case of like AIDS, and he's rapping and then it just cuts off. And like you just know that like, oh wow, something terrible has happened to them. And that idea of like you can just cut something off and then maybe the reader just knows what something bad has happened. So I just totally stole that from and then used it for Najee and Light Feet. I guess it goes back to the, no idea is original.
Yes.
But I always think about endings and different things to do with it. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, all the endings are fantastic. And we have time for one more question. Yes.
What's up, man? Congratulations. You obviously worked very hard, and it shows through your work. So how does it feel to finally be in this position?
Great question. All right, well, all right. I gotta brace myself and give you the honest answer. So the author of the stories from the Tenants Downstairs answer is, feels great. It's like, yeah, dream come true. You know, so thanks for the love and the praise. The Sidik answer is a lot more complicated. It's you work on something for a long time, and you show early drafts to people, and they're very generous with their feedback, and they tell you the truth. They tell you that it's not finished, it's not where it needs to be, there's some issues with it, and sometimes no matter how much you keep working on it, there are these issues that you have to think about. And it could be discouraging. So you train yourself to say, okay, well, I just went through this workshop and it sounds like my stuff is bad right now. And in order to keep going, I have to not believe that it's as bad as it is. I have to be my own cheerleader. And that's how you just keep going. And then somehow, miraculously or whatever, you get to a point where things work enough where people are interested in it, and people are interested in maybe showing it to others. And it comes out, it's published, and then all of a sudden, it turns from like, there are all these things wrong to like, praise, 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 we're excited, we're excited, we're excited. And by this point, your heart is so scabbed over from not like listening to the critique that it's hard to get the praise, right? It's hard. It's like, you don't even want to believe it, you know? There's a rapper, Lupe Fiasco, his like line is like, I want to believe my own hype, but it's too untrue. And so what you end up doing is you're like, it feels good and whatnot, but then inside, you're like right in the middle. You're like, I'm not believing this, I'm not believing this. It's almost as if like, you're with friends and they pass you a little something like, just smoke this, and you're like, man, this is good, what is this? What is this? And it's like, it's praise, it's called praise. I'm like, ooh, I want this. And then you keep, and then after a while you're like, oh, and then one day you're like, what was that? And then you go, I think it's laced with pushback, or it's laced with criticism. And you know, so you get praise, and then you're thinking like, there's eventually gonna be a day where they're gonna be like, Sidik Fofana lost it, he don't got it, or whatever. And so it's just that constant mix. Sometimes it's stressful to the point where, like with events like this, I always try to do my writing beforehand, because I can't stand of like standing here and being like an expert, or acting like I'm an expert, and then going home to write and like failing miserably. So like I always like fail miserably, and then I can like pretend that I know what I'm doing tonight. But all that is to say that if you're an aspiring writer, even though it's a psychological mind F, there's no greater feeling than like working on something and you know you tried your hardest on it. So
Thank you.
Okay.